Glenn and I have had some real set-tos about Trump, especially because a lot of the listenership are disgusted with me because I'm so implacably opposed to and scornful of Trump. We even had an off-the-record exchange about it the other day because it's hard. It's getting really tough. He and I will be okay because we both respect different points of view, but it's gotten hard. I would say our hardest conversations have been about that and then about Ta-Nehisi Coates's book about his trip to Israel. We really, that was that one because there's a certain amount of histrionic, that's the wrong word. There's a certain amount of theater involved in doing a podcast when you know that there are people who are watching. Glenn and I know what we're doing. I know when to cue him to one of the Glenn rants or something like that. We're doing jazz. The one time when I actually was upset, when I was thinking I'm angry now and this is not just play acting, was during the Ta-Nehisi Coates Israel Gaza conversation. And Glenn felt the same way when we stopped that one.
Just tell people the contours of that disagreement.
Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote a book where he went to Israel and
he's a prominent intellectual black left-wing writer.
Yes, very prominent. He's a superstar. And his latest book is, among other things, but the main part of his latest book, which is called The Message, is that he spent a short period of time being taken around Israel and being shown the situation in Gaza. And he came away feeling that there is a genocide happening and that what's going on with Gaza in Israel is what he would call an apartheid. That is a view that he is allowed to have. But I felt that he hadn't really studied the prelude to the current situation very much, and that I found his analysis superficial.
And this was pre-October 7th that he went. And I think he went to the West Bank, right? Not Gaza, but he was looking at...
He did not go to... No, I think he did see Gaza, I'm pretty sure, but it was before October 7th. But as far as he was concerned, Coates, in the interviews that he did, everything that he said in the book pre-October 7th applied. He was one of the people who tacitly feels that what Hamas did, while unfortunate or troubling, as people like him would say, was an inevitable and in a certain abstract sense defensible response to what Israel has done. All of this is very Frantz Fanon. I find that an overly simplified view of what has happened in that area over the past roughly 125 years. I just think that it doesn't take account of the complexity. And Coates' view is that there's nothing complex about it, that there are times when you have to stop thinking of things as complex. There's just a simple moral calculus. Glenn thought that Coates wrote a good book. He didn't agree with everything, but he respected what Coates had done, which is interesting because Glenn and I in the past on the show have criticized Coates in general, and Glenn has always lit into him more strongly than me. But for reasons I don't completely understand, and I genuinely don't, Glenn was more patient with this book than I expected. And so we just got into an Israel argument. Neither of us are Jewish, but it got not nasty, but we were both frustrated. And when that show was over, we said, are we okay? Which had never happened before. And we are okay. But that was a tough show. That was a really hard show.
It was because of that conversation that I read the book,
Really?
Which I hadn't been planning to. Yes.
Huh. Do you like it?
No.
Okay.
But I'm glad I read it. I think he's a really interesting writer, and I think he has an incredible turn of phrase.
He's great with a pen.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that.
But it is...
Is it fresher in your mind? He didn't go to Gaza. You would remember because I read it like 6 months ago.
You had that conversation
like
at
6
least
months ago?
6 months ago, I would have thought. Yeah, I think I read it about 4 months ago. My recollection is that it was mostly the West Bank because I think he was mostly talking about the indignities of Palestinians having to go through checkpoints and stuff, which is really a West Bank phenomenon where you've got the settlements and you like because Israel isn't in Gaza,
right?
It wasn't in Gaza prior to October 7th.
At that time,
my assumption was that he was witnessing all of these indignities in the daily lives of Palestinians who are constantly bumping up against Israeli checkpoints in Israel, and that would be the West Bank, because in Gaza there was no bumping up against Israelis. It was just a Hamas stronghold.
Yeah.
But I do think it's in the single point that I thought that Glenn honed in on in an interesting way, and you had great responses to it, was this point that you just alluded to about like maybe we can sometimes overthink things, and maybe treating an Arab in the West Bank differently than you treat a Jew in the West Bank is prima facie wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go through all of them as many millions of words and column inches as you want to try to justify it. But to take the analogy to, for example, the death penalty, I oppose the death penalty. Ta-Nehisi Coates would say it doesn't matter whether or not it's for a terrorist or for someone who stole a loaf of bread. It's a principle that the death penalty is wrong. I oppose it regardless of the circumstances. Similarly, I oppose, treating people differently on the basis of their ethnicity or religion, regardless of what the excuse is.
Yeah,
you're not pulled by the moral tug of that sensibility?
No, because the question is, and this is relitigating what Glenn and I talked about. Yes, the Arabs are being treated differently at the checkpoints, but the question is why? And if the reason why...
But the question isn't why if you just stop the conversation before you get to the why.
Right. But
the question is whether that's a legitimate intellectual move to do.
Frankly,
right?
No.
You could say terrorism is wrong, the death penalty is wrong, and we are carving off, and then we're just putting a full stop, a period.
Right.
And then you don't get to the why.
Right. Of course, the issue is, what do you do about what happened in the past? The Israelis have a reason to believe that if they treated the Palestinians the way the Jews are treated, they would be in danger of being bombed to death. And that's a fact, which I think many Palestinians would say was justified. And I'm even open to the argument that it is. I understand why they might say that this is the only way that we can reverse what happened in the past. And I would say maybe you can't reverse it. But there's a real argument to be had. But I get impatient with the idea that we look at it just the way it is right now at this minute and say this isn't right, as if it's obvious what would be. You know what I mean? Okay, if this isn't the way it should be, how should it be? Should it be that all those barriers are just taken away? Because obviously you can see why Israel wouldn't want that. And that's why this is probably the knottiest geopolitical situation on earth.
I like that your accent makes naughty sound like naughty to me, because it is a naughty geopolitical situation as well. It's naughty. It's naughty. Look, I just think Ta-Nehisi Coates is I am exactly his target market, right? A sort of center left, vaguely guilty for my colonial past, white guy. Even though I'm of Jew, my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and
so there's a complication.
So it's complicated,
right?
But nonetheless, he has a way of articulating what it feels like to be a young, shat upon black man in fear of his life from a white supremacist superstructure.
Yeah,
that is compelling and is catnip to me.
I get that. I think there's an aspect of him that sticks in my craw, and it's not his fault. I would not do differently if I were him. But Ta-Nehisi Coates doesn't like white people. I've heard him almost say it on a podcast. And frankly, I'm black too. And I know from his facial demeanor, I've seen him around white people, his history, he's a type. He doesn't like white people. When white people aren't around, he's the type of person with a beer who'll say, I don't like them, with a laugh. I get it. He doesn't like white people in terms of the way they've treated us and the way maybe they treat us now. He would think about the cops. But what it means is that he's writing to that audience that you talk about. And I don't think he thinks of himself as writing only for black people. I think he knows that mainly it's these white people who think of him as catnip. And it bothers me a little bit that he hates them, that he writes all of this. He gets, paid by these people. He gets lauded by these people. I think a lot of his readers think that if they read him and they internalize the gospel, then somebody like him or he won't hate them anymore. I always think to myself, you realize he still hates you, and he will go to his grave thinking of white people as aliens. That's a weird career to me, and he couldn't do it any other way. I'm not saying that he shouldn't take the money because he doesn't like white people, but I figure you're supposed to respect your audience. I don't think he does.